There's a certain kind of silence that falls in a high-end Manhattan restaurant. The kind where even the clink of a fork sounds like an accusation. That's what I remember most about that night. How fast the room went quiet, and how much noise one man's voice could make before it did. Ben Foster wasn't even supposed to be at our table. He'd originally RSVP'd no to the charity dinner. Something about travel plans or a conference in San Diego. But there he was anyway, grinning like he belonged, a glass of red wine in one hand and a smug sense of importance in the other. I'd met Ben a few times before, always at some Harbor Bridge function, usually attached to Emma's elbow. He was the sort of guy who knew how to laugh loudly at board meetings and quietly at his own jokes. Legal counsel for the firm, younger than most, arrogant enough to think the whole room was built around his voice. And maybe it was for Emma anyway. She always said he was harmless. Harmless men don't usually inspire that kind of nervous smile from your wife when you walk into a room. The dinner was meant to be a simple fundraiser for coastal conservation efforts. Lobster bisque, jazz trio in the corner, speeches from CEOs who cared just enough to read from the cards their assistants wrote. We were seated at table 4, right near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Wind lightly pressed against the glass, the reflection of chandeliers glittering over the dark water outside. Emma was in a black cocktail dress. Something new, I think. Off the shoulder. Subtle but expensive. She looked beautiful. Distant, but beautiful. We'd barely spoken on the ride there. She was texting the entire way. We'd made it through most of the courses. Small talk about inflation, hiring freezes, who was moving to Connecticut. Ben had been drinking since the first pour, and by dessert, the restraint he normally wore like a cheap cologne had completely evaporated. He leaned back in his chair, wine in hand, and with a lazy grin said it. "To Emma," he said, raising his glass, still keeping the ship afloat, even while dragging along a freeloader of a husband. The words landed heavy, and then it happened. Laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. Nervous chuckles, sideways glances, the kind of ambient approval that makes cowards brave. I caught the eye of a senior partner from operations. He immediately looked down at his plate. Someone at the end of the table actually clapped. Emma? She gave that same tight smile she always used when something was both inappropriate and inconvenient. I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Ben took a sip, leaned over, and whispered something into Emma's ear. She didn't laugh, but she didn't move away either. I planned for this. Not Ben specifically, but the night, the audience, the opportunity. I looked across the room and caught the eye of the maitre d', who had been discreetly watching from behind a column near the bar. I gave him a small nod. 2 fingers, subtle. That was the signal. He stepped out of view and returned a moment later with a silver tray of cream-colored envelopes, each one sealed with a gold wax stamp. Quietly, methodically, he began placing one in front of each board member and executive seated at our table, and then he moved to the other tables one by one. People paused. Conversation tapered. Chairs shifted. I saw someone from compliance raise a brow. Emma turned her head sharply toward me, eyes narrowing. "Michael," she whispered. "What is this?" I didn't answer right away. I waited until every envelope had been delivered. Then I stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly. My voice wasn't loud, but in that room I didn't need volume. I had timing. I had silence. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption." I lifted my glass and let it hover midair. Inside those envelopes is a notice of an emergency board meeting, scheduled for Monday morning. Attendance is not optional. Heads turned. Hands reached for envelopes. Some were already opening them. And for those who haven't heard, I continued. Grant Ventures now holds a 78% stake in Harbor Bridge Capital, effective last quarter. The sound that followed wasn't shock. It was calculation. A room full of men and women trained to smell shifts in power the way sharks sense blood in water. No one looked at Ben. Not anymore. Their eyes were on me. "I look forward to seeing you all then," I said simply. Then I sat back down, took a sip of water, and resumed cutting into my entree like nothing had happened. The silence held for a full minute. When conversation resumed, it was clipped, uncertain. No more jokes from Ben. No more casual touching between him and Emma. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, her fingers curled tight around the base of her wine glass. She didn't speak until we were in the car. Even then, it wasn't about what Ben said. It was about what I'd done. "You planned that," she said, her voice sharp. "Of course I did," I replied. "You made it look like a stunt," she said. "Like some power play." "No," I said. "I made it clear who's in charge." She didn't argue, not out loud, but her silence was loud enough. We didn't speak again until we were almost home. The bridge lights passed above us like slow, measured blinks. Emma sat turned slightly toward the window, her phone resting face down in her lap. Then my phone buzzed. An automated alert from the Harbor Bridge internal security system. I read it twice before reacting. Access log update. Unit 1704. Code. Guest. BF 923. Entry. September 8th. 11:18 p.m. Entry. September 15th. 7:42 p.m. It wasn't just the apartment. It was the guest access code. One only Ben Foster had. The system's logs didn't lie. They didn't guess. The codes were assigned, date-stamped, and linked to unique keycards. Emma had been there. Twice. Alone. I turned the screen toward her. She barely glanced before responding. "Oh my God, Michael. Are you serious right now?" she said, crossing her arms. "This is what it's come to? You're tracking me?" "I'm not tracking you," I said. "I own the building. I get the logs." "I was doing a site inspection," she said, turning it into an accusation. "Ben asked me to check on the unit. There was a leak last month. You know this." "There's no leak." She blinked. Just once. Quick. Then, "I don't know what you're trying to insinuate, but this is paranoid." "No," I said. "It's precise." She scoffed and looked away again, clearly rehearsing her next line, probably thinking through what else I could know, or not know. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She flipped it over quickly. I didn't press her. Not then. I didn't need to. I'd already seen enough. And in the silence that followed, between the buzz of streetlights and the slow creak of suspension cables above, I began to tally everything. The late nights. The emergency calls. The second phone I'd once glimpsed in her purse with the screen face down. A week earlier, I'd noticed mileage on her car didn't match the routes she claimed. Just over 200 miles unaccounted for in 3 days. And then there was the gym membership, some boutique training club that didn't show up in any online registry. But the payments were real, recurring, under her name. One or two of those things could be explained. But the apartment meant intent. It meant planning. It meant lying. And maybe, just maybe, Ben's public jab wasn't about humiliating me. Maybe it was his way of marking territory. Back home, the city lights gave way to the low hum of suburbia. Our house stood on a quiet, tree-lined street where everyone had a landscaping service and no one parked on the curb. It was the kind of neighborhood where people nodded instead of waved, where you could hear your own heartbeat in the driveway at night. We pulled in, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Emma sat with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the garage wall. I stayed behind the wheel, hands loose on the steering wheel, my mind working faster than I could process. The access log on my phone was still glowing in my lap. I turned the screen off and pocketed it. If she wanted to lie, I wasn't going to interrupt her. I was just going to watch. She got out first, slamming the car door a little harder than necessary, heels tapping across the stone walkway. I followed a few seconds later. She didn't wait for me to open the door, didn't offer a word. Once inside, she disappeared upstairs without so much as a glance back. I heard the bedroom door shut. Not slam, not lock, just shut. Quietly, intentionally. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the marble countertop, the unopened mail, the empty wine glass she'd left in the sink from the night before. It was all so familiar, yet none of it felt like home. The house didn't feel cold. Felt staged. Sterile. like I was walking through a version of my life that someone had recreated after reading a summary. And suddenly, the details that hadn't made sense before, the little things I'd brushed off, made excuses for, started lining up like lights down a runway. That meeting 2 months ago she swore had been rescheduled last minute. Only I'd seen the event on the company calendar disappear right after I asked about it. A new password on her laptop, which she said was required by IT. But mine hadn't changed. The second phone, face down on the bathroom counter when she'd left the water running. I'd only seen it once, and when I brought it up, she acted like I was imagining things. "I think you're just tired, babe," she'd said. "You're always seeing ghosts. Ghosts don't carry burner phones." And then there were the trips downtown, always to the same general area, near the waterfront. She'd say she was meeting clients or scouting locations for expansion. But I'd driven by the address on a hunch once. It was an apartment building. Not the Harbor Bridge offices. Not any known development property. Just a generic luxury tower with private elevators and blacked-out windows. That night, I told myself I was overthinking it. But I wasn't. And then there was the gym. A boutique club she'd mentioned in passing. Said it was invitation only, with a personal trainer who specialized in high-performance routines. I remember smiling, telling her it sounded expensive. She said it was comped by Harbor Bridge as part of a wellness benefit. But when I looked it up later, out of idle curiosity, I told myself, there was no listing, no Yelp page, no Instagram presence. Just a shell website that looked like it was built in 15 minutes and hadn't been updated since 2019. Yet every 2 weeks, the same charge appeared on her account. $240. Same merchant code. Same vague memo line, HBC Performance Services. When I asked about it again, she said, "You're not seriously checking my credit card statements now, are you?" But there was a tightness in her voice. Not fear. Not guilt. Control. The kind of tone someone uses when they know they're in the wrong, but they also know you're not ready to act on it. And for a while, I wasn't. I let myself believe it was just stress. Burnout. The cost of ambition. We'd both been pushing hard lately. She with Harbor Bridge, me with the new round of acquisitions through Grant Ventures. Maybe we'd just grown distant. Maybe she felt lonely. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. But that theory only worked if she was honest about the loneliness. And she wasn't. Because while she was burning out, she had enough energy to go on unexplained overnight trips. To come home with unfamiliar cologne on her coat. To sleep with her phone under her pillow and set her laptop to auto-lock after 60 seconds. There was a pattern forming, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That night after she went to bed, early by her standards, I stayed downstairs and pulled out my tablet. Not to check emails, not to work. To dig. I started with her company laptop. She hadn't logged out properly the night before, and while she was upstairs, I opened it again. Most of her folders were password protected now. That was new, especially the ones labeled Q3 revisions and strategic direction private. She'd never locked files before. I clicked around carefully, noting that several folders had been modified at 3:18 a.m. the night prior. Remote login. That also wasn't like her. Emma wasn't a night owl. If she was working past midnight, it was usually because something was on fire at work and I'd hear about it. But she hadn't mentioned anything. No late-night emergency. No, sorry I was up so late. Just silence. I checked her browser history. Mostly clean. Too clean. No social media logins. No personal email. No news sites. Nothing but work dashboards and blank PDFs. That's when I knew she'd started scrubbing. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I closed the laptop, wiped it for prints with the sleeve of my shirt. Not that she'd check. And set it back exactly how I found it. Then I moved on to the garage. Her car was parked as usual, perfectly aligned in the spot closest to the entryway. I popped the driver's door open and checked the mileage. 48,937. The last time I checked, 3 weeks ago, it had been just under 48,000. She'd only mentioned 2 commutes to the office and 1 out-of-town conference. That didn't add up. That was at least 500 miles unaccounted for. I looked at the GPS history on the in-dash system. Most of it was wiped. Again, not normal. But one location still lingered in the Recent Destinations tab. Pier House Executive Suites, Brooklyn waterfront. The same place I'd seen her name pop up in the billing records 2 months earlier when I was doing a routine audit of our real estate arm. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Harbor Bridge occasionally used the suites for off-site meetings, and Emma was in operations. But now it was the third reference to that location in as many weeks. Something clicked. Something I'd been trying not to name. This wasn't just work. And it wasn't just Ben. I went back inside, retrieved my spare AirTag from my office drawer, and stared at it for a while. I'd slipped it into her bag a month ago, the smallest pocket in the lining. Not to spy, but to verify. Just once. After she told me she was at the gym and I saw her location flicker downtown. But a week later, the signal cut off. When I asked if she'd gotten her bag cleaned, she looked up with the most controlled smile I'd ever seen and said, "Oh, I found some weird little chip in the lining. Thought it was old. Threw it out." Just like that. Like it was hers to discard. That's when I knew she knew. I sat down at the kitchen table, turned off the lights, and listened to the creak of floorboards above me as she moved around getting ready for bed. I wondered if she was texting him, if she'd memorized the cadence of his breathing, if she knew I was unraveling the story piece by piece. Because that's what this was now. A story. One she'd written behind my back. And I was reading it out of order, but I was catching up fast. It's a strange thing, watching a suspicion harden into truth. There's a sick kind of gravity to it, like the moment before a car crash, when your brain knows something's coming but your hands are still on the wheel, pretending you can steer. I used to think betrayal would feel like a single, sharp event. A text message. A confrontation. A kiss you weren't supposed to see. But this was slower, colder, less of a knife, more like frostbite. It was the next morning when I finally decided to stop pretending. Emma left early. Said she had a strategy session with legal and facilities downtown. No calendar invite. No mention of it the night before. No details even when I asked, casually, as she poured herself a second coffee. "Big group?" I asked. She didn't look up from her phone. "Just a few of us. Ben's team, mostly." I didn't say anything, just nodded. But I watched the corners of her mouth. The way she bit her lip like she was suppressing something. Not emotion, strategy. She left at 7:42 a.m. At 7:58, I logged into the internal system. Being the controlling entity of Grant Ventures comes with perks, quiet ones. There are redundancies, hidden admin tiers, security tools that only the real owners know exist. Emma had never asked how much control I retained after consolidating our interests in Harbor Bridge. She assumed we shared influence. We didn't. I pulled up the digital access logs for the Harbor Bridge service apartments. There were 3 apartments listed under the executive rotation, each tied to a different division. But Unit 1704, the same one from the alert 2 nights ago, had been accessed 5 times in the last month. Always after hours. Always with the same guest code. Ben Foster's. Every entry was tagged with proximity badge data. Internal cameras, too. Nothing live. Just stored /*TS for audit purposes. I opened the archive, and there it was. Emma entering the suite at 7:11 p.m. Alone. The camera above the elevator caught her reflection in the mirrored panel. She wasn't carrying a laptop, just a handbag and what looked like an overnight tote. The next frame, Ben entering at 7:24. The suite door closing behind them, and then nothing for hours. Until the door opened again just after 1 a.m. Same 2 people. Emma's hair was pulled back now. She was wearing a hoodie over the same dress. No kiss. No hand-holding. Just silence. But there are silences that say everything. I backed out of the camera feed, suddenly cold. The timestamps matched perfectly with taxi logs I retrieved from our vendor account. Her phone had ordered a car from that address to our home at 1:13 a.m. The route? 15 minutes, no traffic. The log entry showed, quiet ride requested. I opened a second browser window, loaded her work email backup. I wasn't supposed to have access, but she'd used a shared Grant Ventures VPN node 3 weeks ago, and I still had superadmin credentials from the infrastructure migration last year. I searched for the phrase closed meeting. There were 8 results, all forwarded from Ben's Harbor Bridge address, all sent between 9 p.m. and midnight, all flagged private. The most recent message, subject, closed meeting urgent, to Emma Grant, from Ben Foster. Timestamp, Friday, 11:32 a.m. Same place, same code. I'll leave the key in the lockbox like last time. Just need an hour of your time. We'll keep it discreet. There was no mention of contracts, no reports, no context, just familiarity, coordination, the kind of message you send when this isn't new. I clicked through to the attachments folder. There weren't any, just a string of follow-ups. Brief, clinical. 7 works. I'll be in the lobby. Got it. Use guest code, don't buzz. Delete this chain. She hadn't. Not fast enough. I sat there, staring at the screen, my cursor hovering over the folder like it had weight. My hands didn't shake. My jaw didn't clench. I felt numb. The doubt was gone now. This wasn't emotional distance. This wasn't burnout. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern. It was a plan. It was betrayal in calendar invites and key codes. And what crushed me wasn't just the affair. It was the competence of it. The operational discipline. The neatness of their deception. The fact that she had built a system for it, the same way we used to build systems for clients. Compartmentalized. Streamlined. Rehearsed. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of it settle. She'd made it clinical, professional, almost corporate in its execution. No messy texts, no romantic language, just time blocks, locations, and logistics. It would have been easier if I found something emotional, a confession, a diary, anything that hinted at regret. But all I found were habits. I spent the next 2 hours collecting everything: timestamps, logs, file metadata, cloud access reports. I mapped it out in a spreadsheet. Side-by-side views, entry time, duration, exit, commute, follow-up email. It was airtight. In the process, I found something worse. She had recently used the Harbor Bridge secure transfer system to send herself 4 folders from her work drive. The files were encrypted, labeled generically, Ops Review, Budget Draft, TQ Materials. At first glance, it looked like standard document migration. But the destination email wasn't her company address. It was a personal account. Gmail. One I didn't recognize. I ran it through our employee asset monitor. It had shown up in an outbound filter just once before, on a file Emma sent 2 months earlier labeled Draft Internal Memo. Same transfer gateway, same email. And 20 minutes after the send, a log request for deletion from the server. A failed attempt. She didn't have root access, but the attempt was there. I marked the entries, took **ts, created a backup archive. Then I paused. I was standing at the edge of something bigger than infidelity now. If I pushed forward, this wouldn't be about us. It would be about Harbor Bridge, about liability, about exposure. But I had no choice, because suddenly I wasn't just the husband. I was the owner. And this wasn't just a marriage on the line. It was the company. When Emma came home that evening, she was in a different outfit. A tailored blazer, no accessories, no jewelry aside from her watch. Her hair was pulled into a tight ponytail. Too clean, too professional for someone who supposedly spent the day in legal strategy meetings. She walked in with a bottle of wine. Figured we could use something nice tonight, she said, setting it down on the counter like nothing had happened. Quiet day, I asked. She nodded too fast. Just meetings. Been there? Not this one, she replied without missing a beat. His team was pulled into a compliance review. I just nodded, and I watched her lie. Again. Later that night, when she was in the shower, I checked her laptop. It was off. Not sleeping off. The lid had been closed for more than an hour. The charging light was blinking. I opened it. The screen came to life. Password required. New wallpaper. New file structure. Empty trash bin. But one thing hadn't changed. Her eyes. They were still capable of looking directly at me and telling me the sky wasn't blue. That night I didn't sleep. Not because of anger. Not even pain. Because now I knew. And soon so would she. I didn't wait long. By Tuesday morning, I had everything I needed. And when I say everything, I don't mean the texts, the access logs, the hotel receipts, the deleted emails. I had those, yes. But what I really had was position. I had ownership. Most people at Harbor Bridge had no idea who actually controlled the company. On paper, the major voting shares were split between a handful of investment vehicles. Shell firms, offshore holdings, deferred equity pools. It all looked like scattered governance. But I built that scaffolding. Grant Ventures was never just a family firm, it was a hydra. And through quiet acquisitions, layered LP structures, and a few strategic silence agreements, I had consolidated more power than anyone realized. I held 78% of Harbor Bridge capital, which meant I didn't need Emma's permission. I didn't need the CEO. I didn't need to explain myself to a single managing director or advisory partner. All I needed to do was decide. So I did. I called it Plan B because, in my mind, Plan A had always been trust. Partnership. Build something together. But when someone rewrites the playbook behind your back, you stop playing nice. That morning, I logged into the back end of the internal management system and executed the first step. Freeze administrative access to the Harbor Bridge service infrastructure. That included Ben's team. Emma's included. No warning. No emails. No conference call. Just user permissions revoked. I queued a full forensic backup of all Harbor Bridge Company laptops and mobile devices assigned to Ben's department. The order triggered a silent sync, imaging their devices remotely while mirroring their cloud drives. These were standard tools buried in our security policy. No one ever expected them to be used on insiders. Then I scheduled audit triggers for every transaction involving Harbor Bridge discretionary fund disbursements for the past fiscal year. Any payment over $2,500 flagged for review. Any payment split into smaller increments, flagged twice. I also activated secure replication of our legal communication archive to a cold storage node in Zurich, just in case someone tried to go nuclear. By 2 p.m. I'd pulled every internal memo tagged with the words consulting, compliance, and external services. The volume was stunning. Over 300 entries. Most of them tied to short-term vendors who were awarded contracts through Emma's department, and many of them linked to the same cluster of payment accounts. Shell companies, fake EINs, pocket contractors. I didn't know yet if Emma had built the whole scheme or if she just helped cover it. But what I did know was that she'd touched nearly every transaction that looked dirty. That was enough to act. That night I made 2 calls. The first was to Rachel Price, our lead analyst. She wasn't flashy, Harvard, background in forensic accounting, hired quietly 6 months ago, but she was clean and smart, and she never once played the Harbor Bridge games. She still had the look of someone who believed in balance sheets. I told her what I had. "Are you asking me to help expose them?" she asked. "I'm asking you," I said, "to help me take the company back." There was a pause. Then, "Send everything. I'll start pulling the financial threads." The second call was to a lawyer. Not mine, the board's. A neutral third party. Someone whose allegiance was to procedure, not personality. I didn't tell him everything. Just that I was exercising my authority as majority owner to convene an emergency governance meeting and issue a preliminary administrative hold on several executives pending a full audit. He tried to push back. "I'm not asking," I said. "I'm notifying." The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. That gave me 72 hours. Long enough for Rachel to pull patterns from the data, short enough to catch everyone off guard. In the meantime, I made one more decision. The incident at the charity dinner, the moment Ben humiliated me in public, that would become the public origin point of this whole thing. A theatrical trigger for the media if it came to that. No mention of the affair. No need to make it personal. But privately, it was fuel. Because I knew exactly what they were doing in that apartment. And I wasn't just going to cut them out, I was going to burn the whole rot down and rebuild it clean. That Wednesday, Ben tried to log into the server and couldn't. Then Emma. Then her deputy. My phone lit up with internal escalation messages. IT tickets. We're experiencing credential issues with high-level staff. My assistant forwarded me a Slack message thread where someone joked about a Friday the 13th style bug. I didn't reply. That evening, Ben texted Emma. Did you change your admin key? Mine's toast. Her response, what I recovered from the backup later, was short. Mine too. Something's wrong. Meeting tomorrow, don't say anything yet. I smiled. They thought this was a glitch. They didn't realize it was a coup. Thursday night, I finalized the packet for the board. The cover page read, for internal review only. Emergency governance inquiry initiated by majority shareholder. Prepared by Michael Grant, Grant Ventures. The rest? A detailed walkthrough of the embezzlement structure. Fictitious consultations billed through newly formed LLCs, created within weeks of major funding rounds. Contract splits just under audit thresholds. Backdated invoices. Wellness reimbursements for non-existent services. Repeated coordination between Emma's team and Ben's legal group. And at the bottom of the summary report, recommended action. Immediate suspension of Emma Grant, Ben Foster, and affiliated deputies. Independent audit of all discretionary fund disbursements. Temporary leadership reassignment to Rachel Price, pending confirmation vote. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't need to. I already knew how it would go. Friday morning arrived with rain. The board meeting was held at a secured satellite office in Tribeca. My choice, not theirs. I'd preemptively filed a venue change with the court system, knowing that at least one director might try to move the meeting or delay it. I'd even obtained injunctions to prevent quorum disruption. They showed up. All of them. Even the ones who'd skipped 3 out of the last 5 meetings. Ben wasn't invited. Emma tried to come anyway. She made it as far as the security desk, badge in hand, before she was told her credentials were inactive. I watched from the monitor in the boardroom. She argued for 2 minutes, then left. No scene. Just a cold fury on her face. Inside the room, I laid it all out. No theatrics. No outbursts. Just data. Numbers. Names. Connections. Rachel was sitting beside me. Quiet. Focused. She handed out a copy of the packet, answered questions clearly, and offered recommendations for containment and client notification. By the time I finished, the silence wasn't disbelief. It was shame. Because they knew. Not the full scale, maybe, but they knew something was off. The expenses. The consultants who didn't return calls. The vendor reviews that went nowhere. They just didn't think anyone would trace it back to them. CEO Mark Hale was the first to break. We can't make assumptions without a full audit, he said, adjusting his tie, already sweating. Rachel responded before I could. We're not assuming. We're documenting. And if the board doesn't act now, you're complicit. That was it. The room flipped. A motion was made. A vote was called. Mark was removed. Rachel was appointed interim CEO. And the first formal investigation in Harborbridge's history was launched by me. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. I walked to the elevator alone. As the doors closed, I pulled out my phone. There was a text from Emma. What did you do? No question mark. Just a demand. I didn't reply, because she already knew. And this was only the beginning. The building was still damp from Friday's rain. Like it had absorbed the tension of the last 48 hours and didn't know how to let go. But that morning, the offices of Grant Ventures felt different. Clean. Quiet. Not because the mess was gone, but because I'd named it. Emma hadn't contacted me again after that text. She didn't call. She didn't come home. She didn't send one of her carefully crafted apologies or rehearsed explanations. For once, there was no performance. Told me one thing. She was scrambling. Good. Because I wasn't done yet. Monday morning, I walked into the analyst suite at 8 o'clock sharp. Rachel Price was already there, hunched over two laptops and a mountain of printed ledgers. Her eyes looked like she hadn't slept since Friday. She hadn't. Neither had I. "This is bigger than we thought," she said as soon as I entered. "No hello. No small talk." "How much bigger?" She slid a binder across the table. The front page read, "Forensic Summary, Phase 1 Findings." "Emma didn't just authorize the payments," Rachel said. "She structured them." I didn't speak. I flipped through the pages slowly. Charts, vendor shells, payment trees. It was all there. Split transfers under audit thresholds. Coordinated approvals from her and Ben. Multiple payments routed through vendors set up within 60 days of a Harbor Bridge cash infusion. I stopped at a line that caught my eye. Recipient, Vertex Elevation LLP. Jurisdiction, Singapore. Beneficiary E. Grant/executive sponsorship. She was building a pipeline, Rachel continued. A gray channel. She didn't just help Ben cover this up. She was actively preparing to move funds offshore. To who? To herself, she said. Or someone acting on her behalf. I closed the binder. So this wasn't just infidelity. Wasn't just personal betrayal. This was theft, wire fraud, regulatory evasion. And she'd done it with the same calm smile she wore every morning over coffee. Rachel leaned forward, lowered her voice. "There's more." "Of course there is," I said dryly. "She initiated a cloud sync last Thursday night. Tried to pull over 1 gigabyte of Harbor Bridge files to her personal Google Drive. Mostly client data, contract templates, internal models. Did she succeed?" "No," Rachel said. "Our endpoint protection caught the sync and halted it after the first few files. But the attempt was logged. And she tried to delete traces of it. She's covering her exit. She was planning it before you blew this open," Rachel said. "The digital forensics show remote access from her home network at 3:41 a.m. She executed a mass deletion script on her laptop. Sloppy work. It left metadata behind." I took a breath. "And Ben?" "Folded." I looked up, eyebrows raised. "He's cooperating," she said. "We confronted him Saturday. Presented the documents, the financials, the access logs. Gave him a choice. And he picked survival." "Exactly." He turned over a full backup of his work correspondence and his private notes. Confirmed Emma's role in approving the off-ledger withdrawals. He also confirmed the other thing. "The apartment," I said. She nodded. "Ben said Emma requested use of the service suites specifically to avoid hotel records. They coordinated calendar blackouts. No one else was supposed to know." There was a moment of silence. Not between us, between me and everything I hadn't wanted to believe, now lined up on the table in ink and numbers and names. I tapped the binder once. "This is enough," I said. "Enough for what?" "Everything." That afternoon, we notified federal regulators. We initiated full disclosure under the whistleblower provisions and filed a criminal referral with the State Financial Crimes Unit. I attached every document Rachel and her team had compiled. Timeline, access logs, IP traces, vendor paths, bank flows, testimony. Then I called the agency liaison directly. "Do you want the full scope?" I asked. He hesitated. "You're offering to disclose a coordinated internal embezzlement scheme?" "I'm offering to K*LL it." By Tuesday morning, it was already moving. Court orders, digital subpoenas, agency directives. Then came the searches. At 9:18 a.m., Ben Foster was escorted out of his home in Brooklyn Heights. His laptop, phones, and work files were seized. At 9:42, Emma was picked up. She wasn't at home. She wasn't at her office. She was at a rented studio workspace downtown. A private executive suite under a friend's name. Inside, 2 laptops, a burner phone, a suitcase, the kind with wheels. She was leaving, but not for a business trip. When the arrest was made, she didn't resist, didn't cry, didn't scream, just stared forward like it was happening to someone else. The press got wind of it by noon. It wasn't the affair that made headlines, it was the fraud. Harbor Bridge execs accused in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Grant Ventures founder reveals internal corruption, leads compliance overhaul. Private equity giant implodes, relaunches as Grant Financial under new ethics charter. By that afternoon, the market responded. We lost clients temporarily, then gained new ones. The message was clear: we cleaned house. Fast, thoroughly, and with zero tolerance for the rot. Rachel was officially installed as CEO by emergency vote. Mark Hale was removed. 3 senior partners were placed under review. And me? I dissolved the Harbor Bridge brand. It was radioactive now. We launched anew under Grant Financial, leaner, cleaner, fully compliant. New board, new internal review systems, new legal team. But it wasn't the rebrand that felt like justice. It was the silence, the stillness of a company no longer hiding from its own shadow. That evening, I received a final report from the compliance team. One line stood out. Subject E. Grant confirmed to have engaged in sustained efforts to exfiltrate corporate assets and manipulate internal systems. Operational trust fully compromised. Recommend permanent separation and legal escalation. I sat with that line for a while. Then I signed the order. Emma Grant, terminated with cause. No severance. No golden parachute. She would face charges and consequences, not just for what she did to the company, but for what she did to me. The next morning, I filed the divorce petition. No lawyers, no back and forth, just clean documentation, evidence submitted, grounds, fraud, abandonment, and breach of marital trust. I included a statement. This marriage was built on partnership, not deception. The moment she chose to we*P*Ni's trust for personal gain, she forfeited her place in this family, this company, and this future. I hit submit. Then I turned off my phone. They say revenge is best served cold. But this wasn't revenge. This was surgery, cutting out the cancer, restoring what mattered. The company, the mission, my name. And for the first time in months, I could breathe.